What's in a name? It is perhaps the most well-known line in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, mostly because it captures the essence of this tragic story. That in the throes of starstruck love, there is seemingly nothing love cannot overcome, not even a name. Unless, of course, your name happens to be Montague or Capulet. What's in a name? I often wonder that when I hear particular ones. Just Google funny names and you'll know what I'm talking about. A driver's license for a man named Chris P. Bacon. A passport for a woman named Crystal Ball. Someone being interviewed on television by one McDonald Burger. Apparently I thought these were funnier than you do this morning. It's no surprise then that we can often get then confused by one another's names. Not long ago I was in the office with Amy when she said, "The ladies are coming by to do some work at the church." And I said, "Oh, that's great. Which ones?" She corrected me, "Not ladies, Bruce and Leslie Lady." What's in a name? I asked my mom that question about my own name when I was growing up. Her answer was the Mayflower ship, or rather that my name came over in it, along with a bed that she has still up in the guest room of her house. The springs that gouge your back while you lay on that mattress undoubtedly indicate it's old enough to be true, but whether or not it or my name actually came over on that ship, I'll really never know. Legend has it it's traced back to one Elder Nathan Brewster, a clergyman, ironically, although I was named for a Nathan who came much later. He was a Harrison, a last name on my grandmother's side of the family, and well, you all know where else that name has emerged in my family today. I hope he's behaving himself this morning. What's in a name? Well, for those living in biblical times, quite a bit. You see, biblical names meant even more than the names mean today. Sure, if your name is Vanderbilt or Trump or Kennedy, people certainly take notice and know something of your name. But in ancient times, everyone knew what your name literally meant. The Hebrew and Greek versions of your name can be translated into a specific meaning, like the Hebrew for Abraham, which translates father of many. Likewise for David, his name means beloved. Of course, we all know the Greek word Emmanuel translates God is with us, but to the surprise of many, the name Adam is best not translated individually as man, but rather as collectively humanity or humankind. Which is the reason even those long genealogies like the one we read today are important in the Bible. Although we tend to gloss over them thinking they're just a list of long names, and to some degree they are, but they are there also for good reason. Take the name Ruth, for instance. Ruth, literally translated, means friend. It's no surprise then her story has been interpreted as one of the power of friendship and commitment to those we love regardless of our bloodlines. But if you pay attention to the names in her genealogy we read this morning, we find there's a lot more going on in that name. If you remember, Ruth marries Boaz. They have a child named Obed. Obed's son is named Jesse. Remember who Jesse's son eventually is? That's right, the one and only King David. Why is this a big deal, you might ask? Well, as you know, at the center of the Old Testament is a character by the name of Abraham. If you remember, Abraham is called upon by God to start and lead a new tribe, one that shows the redeeming love of God. But only a chapter into this story, he and his nephew, a man named Lot, decide to part ways. Now, if the point is to be a new tribe, things are not starting off well. Only one chapter in, this new tribe has already split. Until the book of Ruth, that is. You see, Ruth is from Moab, and the Moabites are descendants of Lot. So by Ruth returning to Israel and marrying an Israelite in Boaz, this obscure family becomes a story now about Lot's tribe and Abraham's tribe coming back together again. In other words, the book of Ruth is more than just a book about friendship. It's about reunion. It's about healing. It's about homecoming. That's why the story ends with this bit of genealogy. The tribe is reunited and healed just in time for King David to be born. Oh, and as a side note, King David's father, Jesse, you might remember that name too. Not just because I said it a few moments ago, but also because you've heard it read elsewhere, usually during the season of Advent in the book of Isaiah. On that day, the root of Jesse shall stand as a signal to the peoples. The nations shall inquire of him, and his dwelling shall be glorious. Guess who the root of Jesse is who comes through this now reunited bloodline? That's right. The one we call the Messiah, the Son of the living God. What's in a name? There's no doubt they're important. In fact, names are so significant that when you're reading scriptures, you should take notice when they're omitted. It indicates very quickly who has power and who doesn't at the time. In Scripture, this often happens most with women and children, but also with others who are marginalized, like lepers, prostitutes, tax collectors. It's easier to ignore someone, even demonize them, if we label them with something different than a name, or better yet, not learn their names at all. Some have suggested this is the reason the lawyer to whom Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan answers Jesus' question the way he does. You remember this story. After a lawyer asks Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" Jesus goes on to tell the story of the Good Samaritan. Then Jesus turns the question around the lawyer and asks him, "Which of these three, the priest, the Levite, or the Samaritan, do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the robbers?" The lawyer, who's a Jew and whose people hate the Samaritans, cannot bring himself to say even the person's ethnicity, let alone a name. Rather than having to grit through his teeth and utter the word Samaritan under his breath, he responds instead, "The one who showed mercy." And we can't blame him. We do this too. Like when you call your former spouse your ex rather than by her name. When you describe those in prison as felons or thugs rather than Tim and Sherry. Or when we'd rather use a derogatory word to demean another's race or gender or orientation than take the time to understand who they really are. I remember in my previous congregation, we did an educational series on the Abrahamic traditions. Each week we had someone come from one of the three major religious traditions that stem from Abraham, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, to talk about their beliefs and their religious practices. Then on the last night, we had an army chaplain come and talk to us about what it's like to be a chaplain to people from all of those religious traditions while serving in the military. He put it best when he said, it's hard for me to generalize. After all, if you've met one Muslim, well, you've met one Muslim. Just like if you've met one Christian, you've met one Christian. Or likewise, one Jew. Just that. One Jew. I would add the same goes for David or Nancy or Shelton. If you've met one, you most certainly have not met them all. What's in a name? If you really want to know, all you need to do is visit the tomb of the unknown soldier, or stand at the graveside of a homeless man who cannot be identified, or experience a loved one suffering Alzheimer's who can't remember your name. Sometimes a name is everything. Or at least it certainly was for one woman I knew. A few years ago, Cadiz, Kentucky was fortunate to play host to the traveling Vietnam Wall exhibit. The wall was being reconstructed in different parts of the country so that people who otherwise could not travel to Washington, D.C. might get to see and experience this incredibly important monument. My colleague and his church volunteered to help construct the wall, and over the course of several days, they helped to recreate this memorial that carries the names of the Americans who died during the Vietnam War. And each day he noticed an older woman who sat on her front porch across the street, rocking and watching. On the last day, as they were wrapping things up, he looked over to notice the woman was no longer in her chair. Not thinking much about it, he went back to work only to feel a tap on his shoulder. The woman from the porch said, "May I give you a hug?" He said, "Well, sure." And they embraced. He said, "May I ask what that was for?" She said, "My son's not been home for 45 years, but now he is. I needed to say thank you." What's in a name? The truth is, I really don't need to tell you. After all, if you've had yours dragged through the mud at one time or another, whether justified or not, you know all too well. I can remember a few years ago, I kept on getting phone calls from someone that said they were representing a firm that needed to be in touch with me. They were calling because they needed to discuss an important matter, and if I didn't call them back, I'd be subject to a court appearing. In fact, I started getting phone calls from other family members who were being harassed by these same people. They were calling family and friends saying, "We need to be in touch with this Nathan Brown, who's in serious trouble with the law, if he doesn't get us back to us." Finally, I spoke to these folks and they asked, "Is this the Nathan Brown that lives at 132 Chesapeake Court in Rockford, Maine?" I said, "No." "Well, have you ever lived there before?" "I've never even been to Maine." "We must have the wrong Nathan Brown." "Yes, you do." What's in a name? Well, at least for some of you, it's the reason you're here today. At least that's what you've told me. It's easy to find a large church in Atlanta where you can be anonymous. Just drive up and down Johnson Ferry Road in either direction. You'll find plenty. But you don't want to be counted. You want to count. You don't want to only be matter. You want to matter. Deep down, none of us want to be a number. We need to be names. Not that I'm saying I want a test this morning. Even after a year, trust me, I'm still learning your names. And I hope you are too. Isn't that the essence of community? Of what it means to be church? Someone comes and says, "I don't know what to do. I don't know where to turn. I'm overwhelmed. Is there anybody you know who's been through this before, who might be able to help me?" Actually, I do. They go to our church. Here. Here's their name.